it's live. Hey! It's not like I'm a local radio DJ. That'd be a good idea, wouldn't it? Welcome to the programme. We'll wait till everyone comes in before we get into the meat and drink of proceedings. So people missed this last week when we didn't have letters from the League Express.
There won't be everyone here, though.
I know. No, James.
We're not waiting for anyone.
No, we're nicking his Curly Whirlies this week.
Sponsored by.
Not done at Scaramouche Wafers. They've been outbid by the good people at Curly Whirly.
Thank you, Curly Whirly, for the gift.
Not someone moaning. Why aren't all the Australian games on telly? Because they want to make you buy watch NRL. People moaning about we should bring the Challenge Cup final north. Bring the game back where it belongs. How long has it been at Wembley since? 1929. 1929. Bring it back north. Oh, reopen the pits while we're at it. But the award this week goes to Kenneth Roberts of Eccles, who immediately, I don't know who he supports, but he should be banned. Whoever, I don't know who edits the letters page at least.
Well, there's one less viewer.
Yeah, hang your head in shame. And it's for this phrase coming up. Whitehaven need £12,000 to survive, and the amateur game is dying. Yet there are super greed players. Immediately you think, well, you call them super greed, you know. Receiving that amount for playing a couple of matches. Who's getting £6,000 a game? The game I once loved is very sick. Well, I tell you what, it's not the fault of whoever's getting paid £6,000 a week that Whitehaven have got no money, or that the amateur game is dying. That's not their fault. You should look at the people who run those clubs and blame them. Kevin says, evening all. Are you ready, Kevin? Because we know you're a Warrington fan.
Well, should we let Kevin set the agenda?
Kevin, what's happening?
We can have opinions and pass comment.
I mean, I was there yesterday. I tell you what we'll start with, because it'll take 5 seconds of time. Huddersfield Hull. Wasn't that a terrible game, everybody? So that's that done. Well done, Jermaine McGilvey, on scoring a try.
Shame he had to go off with a hamstring injury. Because he still needs another one for 250.
Well, that was an awful game.
Wasn't the most edifying of you can still have exciting even when the quality is low because it went to 5 minutes from time. But
if there'd have been darts on,
not a great watch.
I think we'd have turned it over. But there you go. My dogs are watching, so that's another, I don't know if dogs count as viewers. Told you, Rich, 2 points to Wakefield. I didn't expect it to be that easy for you. I mean, I took Wakefield by 6 on the media tipping competition. Now, unfortunately, my form is much like Castleford's at the minute, or Warrington's indeed, and I'm down near the bottom of the table among some less salubrious names in the Rugby League media. But
are there less salubrious names?
I don't know. I've been accredited for Wembley, so I've got away with that. Warrington versus Wakefield. Well, let's just start with Daryl Powell. I mean,
start with the game.
Start with the game.
Because I think you need to put Mr. Powell into context. So you were there.
I was there.
And your comment was something to do with the Warrington right-hand side.
They weren't very well. Yes, I mean it was pointed out to me by someone who's watched Warrington far more than I have this season that Wakefield just need to attack down the Warrington right, which I believe that might have been Mark Applegarth's plan. He might have had it in a big board at Bellevue. I think they can afford a board with a pen on and just go this way, go this way.
Big arrow, like Dad's Army.
That way, this way for victory. Poor Tom Lynham and Reece Lynn in the first half just stood out on the left-hand side, just nothing to do. Just had to, could have had a chat with the Warrington fans in the away end, but...
Well, Tom would know a few of those.
He would do. And then he scored a try. Have you seen his try?
You have
seen
his try.
It was like Tom Johnson, but,
The flying...
slug, yeah. Prolific. Prolific Tom Lynham. And in his senior, on his 4th debut for Wakefield.
Which has got to be some sort of record.
Apparently Paul McDermott had 3 debuts for Wakefield. So whether... I don't know
McDermott name might come up again soon.
Whether anyone can beat 4 at any club, I don't know.
It's almost unheard of.
Unless someone's been on Joe Reg a million times in a season. But you'd have to play in between for a different club, wouldn't you? But Wakefield attacked down the right-hand side. 22-0 lead at half-time. That was it.
Who was at fault for Warrington?
Well, I mean, according to Matty Ashton, who was very vociferous on the other side of the pitch, wanting it to be shifted his way with a few expletives in there, the other side of the pitch. I think people who've seen the tries have said soft defending. it's one of those games where you come away from, or you stood there watching, and your team is 22-0 up, and you think, we're not really being tested. We're not really done much, not to deserve the lead or anything. You know, obviously, they've worked hard, and you can tell that bringing in Luke Gale and David Fafita and those experienced names they've brought in has taken pressure off.
Funny,
Mason
Max
Lino,
Jowett being fit.
Max Jowett. Taking pressure off a Mason Lino or Will Dagger or whoever's had to play at half back. Shows you how bad the signing of Lee Gaskell was, I guess. Luke Gale comes in, he's never going to play for England again. He's not going to win Man of Steel. He's slower than he was, but he's got a brain still.
He really needs to win about another 4 games this year.
He just tells people where to stand and what to do, and if it all comes off, it works, and it's good. It was funny though when Warrington scored at the start of the second half. There's a Wakefield fan in front of me saying, "Bloody rubbish, Wakefield!" But you never got the feeling that Wakefield had to get out of second gear or anything. Which seems a strange thing to say, doesn't it? But Warrington didn't look very good. George Williams was back, but he can't do everything. Daryl Powell after the game seemed to be blaming it on the middles. Can't change his middles. And I think if you listen to Warrington fans, you can work out which of his middles he probably should change. And he can't. A sense of entitlement.
But he can't because 2 of their middles have gone. One of whom was allowed to go back to the NRL because apparently he was homesick, but they're on the verge of re-signing him. Can't have been that homesick. Or he's homesick
for Warrington now,
yeah. And the other one was perhaps getting more to the heart of what the issue is at Warrington. Was a character that maybe shouldn't have been signed anyway.
I think whoever's in charge of recruitment at Wire needs to be changed too. So it's Kevin Lewis or Louis, apologies, whichever one it is. Warrington needs to bring a head of rugby at the club to oversee everything from the youth to player retention and let a coach do the coaching. Chris supported Daryl, but the demolition yesterday made his sacking the right decision. Need a dictator type, like a Ferguson, a Clough or a Shankly, who control everything and strike the fear of God into owners and players. Who's the rugby league version of Sir Alex Ferguson? Is it the guy you mentioned earlier?
2. There's one with the surname McDermott, which universally will not be liked, but look at his record. And the other would be Sean White. I mean, they are the 2 people that if you were to get coaches who were born and bred over here and understand Super League, they should be on your list if you're seriously thinking about that. We can start talking now about what we think might be the issue with Warrington, which clearly goes a lot deeper than who is the coach. Because I think last year Daryl had a plan for how he was going to change whatever this mystical notion of culture is. And he mentioned it cryptically yesterday, didn't he, in his post-match press conference, without referring to culture. He was talking about a sense of entitlement, which I think again is around this nebulous notion of whatever culture is. And he tried to get some people out of the club who he felt didn't fit his way of seeing it. Got some new people in who were more in the image of what he was trying to achieve, but some of those players that he got in are no longer there, and you'd question whether they were in fact the right sort of people if you want to change the culture. And then you look at their performances. Clearly last year was an aberration. Finishing 11th was the lowest they've ever finished in Super League, but for the fact that they were never really under pressure in terms of relegation because there was an obvious candidate. It perhaps didn't get the spotlight that it would have done under normal circumstances, because when Daryl was appointed, it was clearly this is going to be the missing ingredient. The start of this season glossed over some of the issues. So, 8 wins at the start, which was a club record. We've now had, 6 defeats in a row, which is the worst for 20 years. But in terms of the phrase that will be used by our good friend Mr. Studd, are they not regressing to their mean at the moment? They're in the top 6. When you go from 11th, you probably are not going to win the competition. So where they are at the moment is probably where you would think they should be. It's just that the fact that they're clearly on a downward spiral that is going out of control. I think it's a lack of identity. and I think it goes a lot deeper than recruitment. I think the fact that they're still termed as wire is part of the issue. You know, and I think it's fine for fans to hark back to that, but the club are the Wolves. In the Summit era, they are Warrington Wolves, in the same way that Huddersfield are Giants. They're not Fartown. And if you are still, even if you got a badge with both names on, if you still got it on one of your stands, who are you? What are you in this modern era? What is it you're trying to promote yourself as? Are you harking back to something because you haven't won the title for so long, or are you moving on to being something new, and trying to sell yourselves in a different manner? And the obvious corollary to that would be what Lee have done this year, who decided that when they came up into Super League, they were going to be something different to the outside world. And it's been for all the, you know, we laughed and joked about how it might have been done initially, and was it even a leopard? Now, you know, how many leopard print designs are we going to be seeing at Wembley with people who can't get enough of this idea that they are the leopards? And I think, again, that's what comes from the top. This is who we are. This is our identity. This is what we want to believe. I saw it at Leeds in 1996. Leeds very much were anti-Super League and moving to summer. They were very much had a regime that was stuck in the mud and were going nowhere. You know, they very nearly were on the verge of bankruptcy. They very nearly had to move to Ellen Road. They had no identity. They were lost in trying to find something that was still in the past. And one thing that Gary Hetherington did, and it didn't make them a successful team, but they became the Rhinos. And everybody bought into, well, what does that mean? Who are we? What do we stand for? It's a rebrand. It's something new. It means something different. It's going to be built around kids. They're going to suddenly become know only this club as the Rhinos. They want to see Ronnie the Rhino. It's only a little thing, but that's where culture starts, in my opinion.
No one in the South shouts Loiners,
no,
do they?
No, and there are some people there that would still refer to
course.
Loiners. And the history of the club is still built around Loiners. But as a brand, and what they stand for, and what they represent in the city, and what people see them first and foremost as, for whatever it means, is Rhinos. And that brand has now been associated, as Leopards has, with something very progressive. I think that, you know, what are Warrington? What is their identity? Who are they? What do they stand for? What is their ethic? What are the kind of players that they're trying to sign? What is the junior development that they're undertaking? How much are they going to rely upon that junior talent that they bring through and nurture and make to feel part of the club? That, to me, is all culture.
I mean, the Warrington fans can say if I'm being unfair, then if you say, what is Warrington? So from the outside, it looks like a lot of sizzle but no steak. Because there's a lot of gimmicks, which are fine when you're winning, but when you're not winning, they look a bit daft. And we've had plenty of comments from Warrington fans. Andy and Bolton, who's not a Warrington fan. We'll come to him in a moment. Chris says the coach needs to be a proven winner, which is funny because in the press conference after the game yesterday, Daryl Powell said, I am a winner. In my career, I have been a winner as a player and as a coach. Now, people would say his record in big games at Castlewood and Featherstone doesn't necessarily bear that out, but that'd be for other people to say. Lots of problems at the club, says Chris. But if there is no respect for the coach and the players think they're bigger than him, then there is an imbalance. Absolutely, the players should be ashamed. Generally out of answers with Warrington, says Kevin. All I know is that our attitude, especially towards defence, is a joke. It's been like this for years, and that's the most important aspect of the game. They didn't defend well yesterday. And again, this is purely on numbers. So they've got at least one marquee player. I'm just going to assume they're spending up to the cap.
Oh, yeah.
We know
yeah,
Wakefield aren't spending up to the cap.
Yeah.
We know that for definite. I don't know how you... Daryl Powell mentioned effort. I'm not going to question a player's effort because I've not been out there. But enthusiasm or whatever didn't appear to be anything. I mean, there's passion from Matty Ashton shouting at his teammates, but how do you turn that around? If the players are apathetic, which seems to be one of the
if you're talking about recruitment and if you're talking about culture, then I think you've got to look at who they've recruited this year and say, what kind of model are they trying to fit? So you look at a couple of those players that have come in from Australia. Why have they come in? Well, one of the reasons they've come in is because clearly their behaviour and attitude in Australia meant that their clubs wanted them to be released. Now, again, I think if you're trying to build a culture, you're trying to get those senior players to act as an influence on the younger ones in the group, you may be asking for a little bit of trouble there. That will only come home to roost if you get situations like today. I mean, people were saying at the start of the season that Paul Vaughan was the best overseas import. I think we were saying on here the other week that his form has tailed off a bit. But, you know, why was he here in the first place? Why did Catalan deem that Gil Dodson and Sam Cassiano had outlived their usefulness to Catalan?
Who are rated? It's not as if they've gone from a top team to, say, a Wakefield.
Then they're not. We're not talking about their ability. Sam Cassiano's ability to release a ball in the tackle is among the best. You know, it's up there with some of the great people we've seen. But why were they being released by Catalan, who have rebuilt their? I mean, that's another team that now know what their identity is, and it's taken a while to get there, and it involves some young French players who are gaining great experience and are going to be there for a long time. But they tend to sign the sort of players. And you're now going to say, well, Tyrone May was let go from his club for a... But I don't think he's going to be there very long. But they deemed that the contribution that had been made by those two players had reached its natural end, and they haven't exactly gone backwards with their recruitment for this year. In fact, so you've got to look at the character of the people that you're buying, not just the ability of the people that you're buying. I don't think anybody's questioning the ability of Matt Duffy when he gets it right. But I think you'd go back to how many teams did he have in the NRL, and why did those teams that he was with, who acknowledged he had great talent, think that there was something missing in his makeup that they decided that they were going to dispense with them. So again, you know, I'm not criticising them as their ability to play this sport. It's far in excess of anything we can bring to the table. But I'm talking about that combination of people and why they are on the market, and did too many of them gravitate towards Warrington?
Kevin's mentioned panic buying, and this kind of leads on to something which happened last week. So we know they've lost Josh Maguire. So that must have taken some money off the salary cap. Was he a marquee player? I don't know. I don't think so.
I suspect he may have.
May have been.
Because he was an Australian and Queensland international, so he wouldn't have been cheap. But again, he didn't have many options left in Australia. His bridges had been burnt.
I'm sure they can fiddle around with their cap space. I'm assuming that Geordie Crowther coming in on whatever deal it is from Wakefield till the end of the season, because he's probably got a deal elsewhere for next. He's not taking up too much cap room if he was at Wakefield.
No.
Now,
and if it's commensurate with the number of games that are left, it still won't be very much.
Last week, Wigan, famous checkbook Wigan, get the book out. Please pay Salford Red Devils apparently £170,000 according to Kyle Amor on the telly. So I don't know where he got the number from. Someone must have told him. Why didn't Warrington go and sign Tyler Dupree? Young English player, talented, up and coming. They need middles. He's a middle. I mean, he might not want it. They might have tried. He might not want it to go. I don't know. I'm just saying, you know, it's interesting.
I think there is a scarcity of talent in terms of, we know that our salary cap, which is a push for a lot of clubs, will not buy you very much, comparatively speaking, to the NRL salary cap or to what certain players are being paid in rugby union. That's another reason why you've got to be very careful about who you buy, but also you've got to be even more determined to develop and play your own talent, because there's no point developing it and then sending it out on loan. I mean, I think, let's use Daryl Clark as another example, who I thought when Daryl Powell came to Warrington, that would bring back Daryl Clark's very, very best form. Whether you think that Daryl Clark has played well or not this year, or up to the standard that he was at Castleford when he was Man of Steel, the truth is that St Helens, who are going to have to make the most astute of signings to replace James Roby, who are going to have to give that number 9 shirt, which is almost comes with that degree of target on your back before you put it on, They will have done a huge amount of due diligence on the person that they think is best equipped to take over from James Roby, and they've made a decision that it's not going to be Joey Lussick, who has gone back and made his debut again, the second debut for Parramatta this week. What they want is Daryl Clark, and they can see something in Daryl Clark that clearly to them is more valuable than Warrington could see in Daryl Clark to try and keep him. Now, it might be that Daryl Clark wanted the challenge. It might also be that Daryl Clark feels that the environment that he's in at the moment is not going to bring him, in the latter stages of his career, the kind of medals and glory that he's quite rightly seeking to cap what has been a brilliant career. But St Helens have obviously identified something that Warrington can't keep. Now, again, I think that's down to not necessarily the ability of the person, but what you want in your dressing room, what you're trying to build around. Now, I don't know who's going to replace Daryl Clark, but the rumour, which has been strong for most of this season, is it's probably going to be Brad Dwyer. Now, again, I don't know whether a new coach coming in at Warrington sees it the same way that perhaps Daryl did. I don't know how much of the signatures that were made at Warrington were Daryl decided he wanted those players, or it was somebody above him within the organisation. I'm not sure from some of the traffic I've seen on the social media that a lot of Warrington fans think Brad Dwyer is going to solve that hooking role for them.
Players never seem to improve at Warrington, says Kevin. Chris says, Warrington remind me of Man United in the 80s. Buying expensive players, but only winning FA Cups and unable to win the league until Ferguson told everyone at the club what needed to be done. Due diligence on player recruitment needs to be questioned, especially from overseas. So the question is, of course, successive coaches, successive groups of players can't win the grand final, whether they're entitled to win that grand final or not. They have won league leader shields and won challenge cups. When do you look above who the coaches are and who the players are and who makes the decision on who to employ?
Well, again, that's where I go back to trying to define what culture is, because culture comes from the very top, and that's not necessarily the person who signs the cheques, whose job it is to look after their money and make sure it's being spent wisely, but they are putting their trust in some senior management, and you have to say that they now need to decide what they want to be and how they want to get there. And it's not, I think there's been too much short-term thinking at Warrington. We need to get a group of players together that are going to do it now. We have to win it this year. Puts enormous pressure on those players, puts enormous weight of expectation on the fans, and you're not building anything. Your foundations are constantly on changing sand. Somebody needs to say, what we need to do is try and win this competition in 3 or 4 years' time when we've got a group of players that will get better. Now, what Tony Smith is doing at Hull is relatively comparable, and he went through a run of 7 games that they lost, but there was no panic. There was no whole scale, we'll deviate from, our plan is we want to have a core of young players, we want to add to it with some overseas players that fit in the model of what we're trying to build, and if everybody gets better every year, at some point we'll be in a position to win. But we're not in a position now where we are and where we've been to suddenly go from, I don't know of a team in many competitions that would go for, in a salary cap competition, so I'm not talking about in football where you can go out and buy whoever you want, so do a Leicester, where you go from 11th in a salary cap sport to win it. So if you were 11th last year, what was your honest expectation this year of where you were going to be and how you were going to get there? But more importantly, where are you going to be in 4 years' time? Where are you going to be in 5 years' time? Are you going to have a generation of players like St Helens have currently got, that when you start winning, you'll sustain winning? Again, that Bradford had at the height of Bullmania, that it didn't happen overnight, but you can't buy it. You could when Wigan were the only full-time team and they had more internationals sat in the stand than they did on the pitch, and nobody for a while could get anywhere near it. We don't have that anymore. You have to say, how are we going to get to where we want to be over a period of time, and what's the mix of people? Toby King was in, he was out, he was happy, he wasn't happy, he was loaned out, he's going back. What does that say about the culture that's being built there? I am not sure. I suspect that it starts above the coach, and the appointment of the next coach will tell us something about whether any lessons have been learned.
Just ask Kev, Chris, any other Warrington fans. Who do you think the coach should be? I mean, does it matter? I don't know.
Who should it be and who will it be are two different things.
Who is the other Tony Smith figure then? Because obviously Tony Smith's busy, he's not coming back.
But again, it depends what you want to be, and
or are they just? Or do they just want short-term success? Do they just want to win the Super League Grand Final, put the line under "It's always your year," and then just is that all they want to do?
In which case, go out and get the best coach you can that will play you probably the most utilitarian type of rugby to win you a competition, but it won't solve your problem. Your problem is you need to build something that's sustainable, and you need to have buy-in, because some of the guys who are on the pitch were once on the terraces, and they feel whatever that Warrington, whatever it, Josh Thewlis, who has come through the amateur game in Warrington, understands why it's important for him to pull on that Warrington shirt. That's what you've got to harness. Not signing Australian players who were only ever going to play 3 games, even though they're big names. Because it doesn't get you anywhere. So do you go for... I mean, clearly everybody's talking about Justin Holbrook, and he understands the competition, and he knows what it would take, but he still needs to be given the raw material. And at St Helens had that core of junior players who were going to be influenced by somebody like Justin Holbrook to achieve their potential, and he added to them that was the core base ingredient. He added to them people who could then elevate them to the next level. People like Jack Wellsby were already in that system. Who are the Warrington players that are in the system at the moment that you're going to build a team around?
Nicholson, Walker, is that it?
Nicholson, who came from Wigan.
Walker came from Widnes.
Well,
that's been a long...
But that's where it starts. We're just finishing off a book with a well-known rugby league player, which will be out in September, who was involved in one of the teams we've already mentioned tonight, who did have some success, but it wasn't sustainable. And it wasn't sustainable because when you start reading what was in the dressing room at the time, it was a group of players who were good enough to go out and win something, but it wasn't a culture that was good enough to sustain that. And things like cup victories come with the luck of the draw. So you've still got to win it on the day, but you only have to win 4 games, and your route to the final is tailored for you. And sometimes you don't have to play all the big teams, or you only have to get up every four times, and you've won a trophy. That is not the same as week in, week out grind, 27 weeks, getting to the end of the season and then being in a position to win the playoffs. That's a different kind of togetherness. And that's where I think it begins and ends with Warrington. I genuinely think that it's not about Daryl Powell, it's not about who they're signing, it's about who they want to be, who they are, and how honest they are with their fans to say, we cannot have overnight success. But again, we need to hear from people who support Warrington to say if this is nonsense or...
Lou says, when Tony Smith came in at the Y, he didn't buy loads of superstars. First thing he did was let players go who were not willing to step up to the plate. I like Daryl Powell, but he's old school coaching upset players. Kevin says, rumours today, Justin Holbrook, but he's been lined up, or linked rather, with Newcastle Knights.
Yeah, they've said that they're sticking with Adam O'Brien. So
he's definitely
if Holbrook was going to go, it would be as an assistant where Brian McDermott is. I mean, I think, again, if they're going to be linked with... Flanagan, Seabold, whoever normally is rolled, somebody who is an assistant coach.
All the people on the articles that were out when whoever the last Super League coach left, they've just taken off one name and added another one.
If it was me, and again, we need to be told by the Warrington fans what they think. They may want Justin Holbrook. They may think because he's won things with St Helens, he's immediately come in with a winning formula, and that's going to work at Warrington. It's about the cattle that you've got. I would reinvent myself and do everything I can to not only give him the job, but give him the time and the desire to recruit in the manner that he wants to do the job. And I'd go and I'd spend the king's ransom on getting Lee Breers.
Chris,
Because I think he is Mr. Warrington.
Chris says togetherness is a great way to describe what we are not. Badger, mushroom, says Powell was unfortunately just a fall guy. The ones who are making the signings and in turn setting the culture, the ones to blame and should be out of a job. Repeated failure. Kevin says, feel sorry for the youngsters, threw in a losing team with a poor attitude and culture and wonder why they don't make it. Now, Daryl Powell had a bad day yesterday. I've had a bad day today because about the drawing the cricket in England have won the pointless 5th test. But also having
Funny
a bad day.
Broad got the last wicket.
You know what's strange?
Fairy tales.
What is really strange is I can't stand Stuart Broad. I've never met him. But for some reason I just don't like him. But he's going to end up with a podcast. He's going to be all over Sky. But at least if he's on Sky, it means they might get rid of Kevin Peterson, who's dreadful. But if I've had a bad day, and Daryl Powell had a bad day yesterday, also having a bad day, former guest on the programme, Stuart Littler, who's just been binned off by Oldham. And guess who's taken over as interim coach? It's only Mike Ford.
No.
Play for Wakefield.
Is that because Stuart Little is going to Widnes?
Is he? I don't know. Let's read out Ian Boldsworth's comments before we move on, because he's written a load of things. He's only got one eye at the minute, so hope you're okay, Ian. Where were you? Where did you start? Here we go. Not a chance a dictator type will help. Prissy team of spoilt babies who will sulk under anyone should all be ashamed of themselves. It spread to the stands, though, in a reasonably small but very vocal minority. The entitlement is unbelievable from top to bottom at Warrington. Same with us at Saints, but we've trophies in stock. So just kicking you there. Never seen the sport get so overwhelmed by spectators who literally can't handle losing any games. Yeah, that's right. Holbrook told them to stop sulking and enjoy it. They did that. Really don't think the present Warrington team have the humility to do that. Pretty confident in 12 months' time, Lee will be equally spoilt by all the red carpets. Ian Boldsworth there. I'll be all right, Ian, with your magnets. There's something else I was going to say about Warrington. What was interesting yesterday in the first half, for those who know the geography of Bellevue, flats at this end, north stand at that side, new stand on the east, open terracing on the west, just like at Leeds. And in the first half, Daryl Powell was sat in the porter cabins on the west stand and had to walk through the fans just before half time when they're 22-0 down. In the second half, he just stood on the touchline on the other side. What does Daryl Powell do next? Because obviously when he's at Castleford, he stops really high.
I was going to say, the jungle drums
yes, high-profile failure.
are saying, come back. And then we're into the realms of the relegation battle. And as we've been saying for the last 2 or 3 weeks, there is one team that has an optimism attached to it. There's one team that seems to have a pessimism attached to it. And there are some Castleford fans in their pessimistic mode who are saying, bring back Daryl and bring him back for the last 7 games of the season. Because if we don't do something, we may be on that downward spiral. And the fact that Wakefield and Castleford have only won home games this year, and the big meeting between the two of them is at Wakefield, and now the points difference was virtually wiped out yesterday, then clearly Wakefield, you would think, are going into that game with the upper hand. Now that's, I think, disrespectful to Andy Last, who clearly has been appointed as the man to keep Castleford in Super League. I'm not sure Castleford could afford to pay him off even if they wanted to, and I'm not sure they could afford to pay what Daryl may well have been on at Warrington. So that's going to be a very interesting dynamic to see how that works out. He will get a job. I think I think there is definitely somebody who will say Daryl is exactly what we need, and I think his track record is sufficient for somebody to say, yeah, he can do it. He can take on that role for us. I suspect what the issue with what Warrington is will not reflect as badly as if Daryl was solely to blame for the position that they're in at the moment. Yeah. I think he's highlighted some things to themselves that they probably haven't wanted to address, and there were a couple of clips from his press conference where he was talking about entitlement, and I think he used the word bullshit because there was a lack of, being blooded on the nose and a lack of effort then when you've had that blow. I still think his core beliefs will benefit a team. Those beliefs clearly don't exist at Warrington at the moment. That's what they've got to look at. So yes, he will get another job. I'm not sure it's quite as simple as some of the Castleford fans think and maybe hope, that he will immediately go and be welcomed with open arms back at Cass. I'm not sure economically it's quite as simple as that.
Ian's back. Don't like that a decent and honest bloke has lost his livelihood because his staff are bone idle. Louis, I think bringing Sean Wayne in to oversee the club and Briers underneath, learning from him, from another great, and then taking up the reins once Wayne has sorted out the processes from youth to first team. Is he going to? He won't leave Wigan. What was his role at Wigan?
That's
the same thing.
Mentoring and bringing players. No, he's a Wigan man through and through. I think. I think you've got to bite the bullet and say, if we appoint Lee Briers, we don't expect to necessarily win anything for 2 or 3 years, but if we give him the reins and we give him the wherewithal to recruit in the manner in which he wants to recruit and play the way he wants to play, and we lose some games that we stand by him, like Hull did with Tony Smith, and not panicking because the plan is bigger than the player, or a group of players. The plan is what we're working to, and some of those players don't fit the plan, they'll be on their way. Some of the players we need to get in will fit the plan, but they might not be as glamorous as some of the ones that clearly don't, and some of the people that we haven't even identified yet as being the talent we can build a team around that is locally based will play for Lee Briers. Somebody who understands it. Go back to this, whatever DNA is, whatever culture is, whatever it is, Lee Briers has it because he is Warrington through and through. It would have hurt him enormously. Now, why would Brisbane let him go? Why would he want to leave Brisbane? He's having a whale of a time out there. They're joint top of the league. He's made an enormous difference. Why would he come back? Because I think the only thing that would bring him back would be the pull of Warrington, with the stipulation that he does the job his way for a certain period of time. And he has to be in charge. See, I don't think him working with somebody else is the answer. I think it has to be him. Doesn't have to be him. There may be other better candidates. I just think if you're trying to understand who you are, you go to somebody like an Adrian Morley or a Lee Briers, who, when Warrington were creating something, epitomised what they were and who they were.
It's all very exciting, isn't it? What will happen at Warrington? And we'll still be here next year saying.
Well, they've got to play Catalan this week.
Yeah, as I think it was Chris pointed out, we'll probably nil them now. But I mean, now, here's the thing then. We go into Friday's game and we will see from the attitude of the players, especially those who weren't named, but it's obvious to work out who they are, and they may have already been named if you can read between the lines of what the coach says and what you can see with your own eyes. We'll see how they perform on Friday on the telly against the Catalans and say...
If they get selected.
If they get selected by the interim head coach people.
Gary Chambers and Richard Marshall.
Interesting times. The other thing with Warrington in terms of entitlement and stuff, and it's entitlement to a space in the first team, but why are, other than spending money on winning a few Challenge Cups and the League Leaders Shield or whatever, which is no guarantee you can go on and win the grand final, why do we make a big thing about it being always there? Because they haven't won it for so long, but they haven't had a period where
they've lost a couple of grand finals that really they should have won. And I think, again, you look at that Tony Smith reign and you think that had it gone the right way in one of those two grand finals, he would still be there, maybe. He probably wouldn't have left, but whether he would still be there after this length of time. But something that he was putting in would have been a firmer foundation than what they've got at the moment. What I think will be really interesting on Friday will be the latitude, if any, that the crowd give the players.
What was surprising yesterday at Bellevue was not the booing at half-time you expected that, but they were quiet throughout. I don't know if any of our Warrington correspondents were there yesterday, and I'm not saying this is a way for fans saying, "Oh, we'll sing a song for you," and all that kind of stuff. There was no chanting or anything, or getting behind the team, or no real jumping. I know they're in the open air, so it doesn't help.
What's interesting about Daryl Powell going is, if there was going to be a scapegoat, he's now no longer there. So the focus won't be on Gary Chambers, it won't be on Richard Marshall, because they've only had a limited amount of time. It will fairly and squarely be on the players, and it'd be really interesting to see how the hardcore Warrington fans react to those players and how much leeway they give them if they don't perform to a manner in which their abilities would tell you they should. Having said that, Catalan are white hot at the moment, deservedly 4 points clear at the top. I'm playing a great brand of rugby. That I genuinely think that they're not the team you want to be playing this week. You may raise your game. I just think they're in such good form.
Badger has thrown the name of Michael Monaghan into the frame. Chris says, I think it was a step up for Powell to go from Castor Warrington, brackets no offence, but now Warrington need to step up to get a standout coach to raise the bar, e.g. Holbrook, Wayne, etc. I don't think that's offensive to Cass. He would have had a lot more money to play with at Warrington, which in and of itself could be it's a different thing for a coach to have to deal with when you've got a limited amount of supplies and you have to work with what you've got. That might be easier in a sense than an not unlimited budget, but you know.
I'll tell you what I also find very odd. I look at somebody like Robbie Mulhern, who has been a standout for Lee this year. I know he's 28, but whatever Lee have done for Robbie Mulhern has turned him into the kind of player that I think as a junior people saw the potential in. That didn't happen at Warrington. You've got to you've got to throw all that into the mix. You know, Ollie Holmes was only there for a year. He came from Castleford to be one of Daryl Powell's lieutenants, but clearly something didn't work. Either the environment at Warrington or whatever it might have been didn't suit him. But he's now at Wembley in a fortnight's time with Lee, and he seems to be running some fantastic lines off Lachlan Lamb at the moment. So again, it's not just the players they've got, it's the players that they had and they now haven't got, who, for whatever reason, and each one will probably be different, didn't feel enough at home at Warrington to be the success that they've gone on to be at other clubs.
Kevin says Ben Curry just re-signed on decent money for 3 years on his day, decent but wrong attitude, no fighting him, so poor decision making again, panicked because other teams were supposedly interested. The Wire fans honestly wouldn't mind us getting beat as long as they put up a fight instead of playing touch rugby. What was interesting yesterday after the game, it was Inclusivity Day at Wakefield. So the women played first. We won't talk about that. Then
they played.
But they played. The PDRL team wandered around with their trophy, which is good. And after the match, they had a LDRL, LDSL, I can't remember which version it is, exhibition, which Warrington were one of the teams involved. Very impressed with one of the Warrington players. Didn't have names or numbers on the back as opposed to Sheffield and Wakefield had numbers on. But little lad trying to shimmy past this other kid, it was brilliant. So get him in the first team because he had the right attitude.
Some of the things that Warrington are doing around their foundation is absolutely commendable. But I think that's the attitude that needs to be taken into the first team.
Interesting time.
Have we saturated the one?
I think we possibly have, unless anyone comes up with anything else. And they've lost Georgia Sutherland this week to St Helens in the Women's League, which that seems like a short-term signing.
She won't be eligible for one.
She's not. No. She's cut tied anyway.
And Carrie Roberts
going to the York Falcons. She'll do the women's bit now. She must have mentioned it. Just having watched the game were you there in time to watch the?
I was.
What did you make of it, York and Saints?
A game of two halves.
My simple analysis was Tara Jane Stanley wasn't good in the first half and York weren't good, and she was good in the second half and York were good. But that's too simple to explain what happened.
All I can tell you is that Lindsay Anfield's face was like thunder at half time and beaming at the end.
So maybe Warrington need Lindsay Anfield, or certainly could have done with her yesterday. Saints will be all right, and York will be all right. Again, the key is
York virtually have won the league leadership.
Yeah. Interesting what happens with Paige Travis following the tackle on Emma Kershaw, whether she gets a ban or not, with the two Leeds players banned for Wembley. But it is what it is. Good win for York. I think it was an entertaining game on the telly. It's all right.
It was a high quality game, and I think again we know that any game at the moment between those top three teams, possibly Wigan, who are again going through a rebuilding phase. Yeah. We know that there's going to be quality because that's where the concentration of the great players are.
Do you reckon all the other teams in Super League don't like Jodie Cunningham? She gets bashed every week. Poor lass. Emily Rogers' finger. That wasn't pretty. I've been dislocating my finger myself. Well, still broken. It's no good, is it? But she's harder than I am. So well done to York. Saints at Wembley, but they play Wigan this week. Leeds versus Huddersfield, Warrington versus York. In Super League 2, Casbarrow, Feverley and Salford Bradford. Warrington beating Huddersfield 26-20 and Featherstone beating Castleford yesterday 54-0.
So here's a question for all the teams that are going to Wembley.
Yes.
2 women's teams, 4 men's teams, 2 from Super League, 2 from the Championship. What team do you pick this week, bearing in mind that anyone who suffers and fails an HIA will not be playing at Wembley?
Well, if I'm Lois Fussell, which I'm not, I'd just pick the complete resis out against Huddersfield. A, because we'd probably win that game anyway, and which is, I don't think that's disrespectful for me to say. And B, you don't need to risk anyone.
So what would you do? Would you do the same with St Helens against Wigan? Bearing in mind that their league positions mean that they know they're in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's a matter of whether you get
between a home tie or an away tie. Does that matter that much?
But are we gonna? Last year we were saying this, and then they had both semi-finals at Leeds. Do we know when the grand final is yet? No, we don't. So.
But in terms of the men's teams as well, if you're Adrian Lamb, if you're Willie Peters, to a lesser extent.
He was at Wakefield yesterday, but I don't know what he was looking for, because they play Wigan this week. So it wasn't as if he was, I don't know if he was looking at players to sign for next year. It wouldn't be anyone from Warrington. So what, Lee have got Leeds on the telly on Sunday.
But only a very short turnaround to Wembley, 6 days.
Well, again, but they haven't got a big squad, have they? That's the problem they've got.
But is this where you sign a couple of players on loan this week, or...?
They're not going to drop out of the top 6, you wouldn't think, would you?
No.
So
no.
Yeah, again, same.
But
same.
You would imagine, if you take Lee as an example, you cannot afford for Lachlan Lamb, for John Asiata, for Edwin Apape to not be at Wembley.
No Lee fan is going to, if they lost to the Rhinos on Sunday, but everyone's fit, go. Oh.
And it's the same with Hull. I think one of the most commendable results this week was Hull KR beating Castleford, which is nothing to do with whether Castleford are a basket case at the moment. It's to do with the fact that clearly you do have to manage your resources. You do have to look at your players that you need to wrap in cotton wool for what will be the biggest occasion of the season. And Willie Peters played an unchanged team, wants to take that... Again, I think he's building something really impressive at Hull KR, and they're not going to win every week, and they may not make the playoffs, but they've already made Wembley. And I think if you're talking about culture and players in the team and who is already earmarked for next year and who's going to be moving on and what he's trying to build and the sustainability around what he's trying to do, there's a model that Warrington could look at and say, oh yeah, see what Hull KR have done over the last 2 or 3 years, and where they were and where they were promoted in that date, and look at them now, where they're going. But I think they have to rest players at Wigan this week. I think there are certain players who are so important to them that they have to have them at Wembley the following week, and the HIA changes everything.
We'll go back to the men's Super League in a minute, just to wrap up the wheelchair action from the weekend as well, which I only saw the highlights because I was at Bellevue yesterday. But London, they could be the ones who upset the northern powerhouse in the wheelchair Super League at the moment.
Semi-final. We're going to be playing either Halifax or Wigan.
They beat Halifax 40 points to 26. Halifax are the defending champions, of course. The other two results slightly more blowout. Wigan beaten Warrington 138-2. Interesting. I'm just reading the report in the paper. Kieran Holt, he was at Rochdale because he was on our table at the wheelchair awards. He's moved to Warrington. So that's
I don't know if he's.
Is he on loan?
Dual reg.
But he's at Warrington. So
he was very, very good in a beaten team. There's something that struck me about. I watched every minute of the wheelchair. I loved it. Yeah. We're passionate devotees anyway. So.
I'm gutted I'm missing the final. I really am.
Well,
really
again, that's a scheduling issue. Yeah. 2 things struck me is that not only is it a great sport, but it ain't half a great sport for social media. Where we all talk about what we need to do as a sport to promote ourselves, we don't do enough to find these little clips that go viral. There were 2 yesterday from the wheelchair that were absolutely immense. The first one was Tristan Norfolk's tackle on Tom Halliwell, which was ultimately futile because Leeds scored from the next play.
Kelsey Gentles in the World Nines.
Exactly, Kelsey Gentles, perfect comparison. But as a clip on social media, wonderful.
Yeah.
And the other one was Ryan King's try, which again, I think it was said on commentary by our very good friend Mr. Wilson at the time,
I remember.
Eat that, Tommy Makinson. It was on a par with how to keep your wheelchair almost on one wheel on its side, use the corner flag to your advantage and get the ball down. But as a viral clip, you don't need to know either who the teams were or who won or where it was in the state of the game. You just go, I need to go and see that. That's brilliant.
Wasn't a bad weekend for Wilson, was it? Women's Super League on Friday, Men's Super League Saturday, Wheelchair Super League Sunday.
Women's Super League on Friday, rushed down to
Talk
Sport
to
do Leeds and St Helens men. We kept his seat warm.
There you go. Leeds beat Hull, 120 points to 14. Jodie Boyd-Ward is coming on the show in a couple of weeks ahead of the final. Well, I've got a big question I need to ask her, which involves Amy Hardcastle, so you can probably work out what the question is going to be.
Is it something to do with haircut?
Exactly. So we need to see if she's pulled rank on that. Amy Hardcastle was good on the telly on Friday. Obviously, you didn't see her, but with Kyle Amor for the women's game, Caitlin Beavy's in the commentary box. Leeds taking over everywhere. Just can't escape. I'm sure there's something else about the wheelchair game. Oh, when are the semi-finals? When are they?
September.
Oh, that's all right.
So the only thing in August is the Challenge Cup final. There's going to be, I think, some trials games for women only.
So, right.
So they still want to foster the idea that it's totally inclusive. And a shout out for Freya Levy, who was outstanding for London. Really, really, really impressive. So you're still going to play at Super League level, but there's been a thought that you may be able to develop more women playing if they're only playing amongst themselves. Yeah. So I think we're going to see the first trials of women-only games during August. Then the Super League picks up again in September with the last 2 rounds of league games, 2 semi-finals and a grand final that is going to be on Sky.
Well, I shall make sure I get my dates sorted so I can attend these things. Welsh Wheelchair Super League starts this week. And the other thing I was going to say about it's a bit like the darts then, where you've got the World Championship with the PDC, the World Championship is open to everyone, and the Women's World Championship is open to women. So that's interesting times. It's good. Comments on stuff. Let's have a look. Kevin, still on Warrington. Players seem to make stupid mistakes at Warrington, drop balls, etc. Basic stuff. It's interesting how that happens when you're losing, and you notice it more than. I was saying this to Dennis from the What Would Brian Bevan Say podcast yesterday. Wait for the 22-0 up and try and stuff. It doesn't work. You're not bothered because they're not 22-0 up. How long's their podcast going to be this week?
Hour-long special, just about one topic.
What is your take on Lee's tackles? Our man Asatana the other week. Because this obviously Paul Wellens caused a kerfuffle by starting his presser last week with a big statement. The RFL are going to investigate, which would they have investigated if Paul Wellens hadn't said what he said?
It's really, really interesting because what Asiata's doing and what, to a lesser extent, James Bell himself of St Helens did on Friday is not illegal. It's not outlawed. Which is not to say it's not wrong. So if you're going to then decide you are going to outlaw it has to go back to the Laws Committee and the various consultations. What I thought was interesting was the RFL, as far as we know, certainly not publicly, have not censured Paul Wellens for what he said. And it could have been taken as bringing the game into disrepute. And what they did say was, we understand what he's saying and why he's saying it, and we will look into it at the end of the season, but we clearly can't do it with 7 rounds of the season left. Actually, you could if you could if you really wanted to, because it has happened in previous years. I think we brought in the 6 tackle rule halfway through the season, 4 tackle rule halfway through the season on a whim. But I'm old enough to remember that. So you can do whatever you want to do, but the fact that they didn't censure him, they said they would look at it and they had a concern, I think in some ways justifies what Wellens was saying. I am convinced that players are not coached to do And you would also say that the way Asiata does it, he's putting himself at more risk than some of the players. And it's not maybe just him targeting low, it's at the same time he doesn't know that there's somebody coming in high or to the side who are also not doing anything illegal, but the combined effect of those people against an anchored player is causing an injury. But if they're not doing anything wrong under the way the laws are currently written, there isn't a lot you can do about it. But that'll change.
I'm not going back and watching every single tackle on people have edited out carefully. I haven't got the time. Well, I've got the time.
I also thought that what Paul Wellens said, there was a difference of opinion on social media. Some said eyes wide open in the headlights. I was in the school that thought what he said was calculated and measured.
Mm. Well, he made it as a statement, didn't he?
Yes.
He wasn't someone saying, "What are you making those tackles, Paul?" No. Badger is a fan of the Leeds wheelchair kicking game. That's the message he says. You can't say that's the tweet anymore because it's X, isn't it? So.
It was bang on again yesterday, but that Collins-Halliwell link is almost telepathic.
Looking forward to
you see that? Don't want to keep going back to Warrington. There's another example. Leeds Rhinos wheelchair, with the same core of 5 or 6 people, were losing 100-0 3 or 4 years ago, but they had a plan. They knew how they wanted to play it. They wanted to work hard to improve. Those 5 or 6 people have won all of the trophies that club has won and are still the team to beat. Now they're going to have an issue, as the men's running team did, as Saints will have to a lesser extent. When those players start to retire, how do you replace them? But already this year, Nathan Mulhall is looking like a very good replacement for James Simpson. Not in terms of style of play, they're very different, but in terms of team first, changing what they thought was the way the game was played to the Leeds wheelchair way of doing it, which is still James Simpson. Makes perfect sense that he's taken that DNA into the coaching.
So the other example in that kind of progression would be Cass for the women, going from losing lots of games to then winning the League Leader Shield, and then that continuing elsewhere, in a sense. Badger says, did I see Saints are forming a wheelchair team? They are. I mean, Ian, you should go play for them.
I think they're reforming, aren't they? I think they used to have one, but they're doing it properly now under that Saints Helens Super League banner, which is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
As we keep saying, every team should have one. No reason why not. It was interesting to note Phil Roberts, guest on the programme last year when we were at Ashton Library, I think it was in Wigan.
With Vossi.
Wasn't too impressed with having to play at 10:30 in the morning, they and Warrington having to go down to Medway, which is, I think, a fair criticism, especially as non-paid athletes, but don't have any problem with that kind of opinion being
expressed. It was also on the sportsman, and I think, again, we look at sometimes the times and dates that games are played, and it is down to your broadcast partner, and the sportsman coverage was fantastic as well.
I don't think that was a whinge for the sake of having a whinge.
No, I think he's perfectly entitled.
Here's the podcast news. Remember when we used to get the Man of Steel points through, and that was a thing. Now it's just podcasts because we don't get any. Do they do anything with the Steve Prescott Man of Steel things?
They announce it every now and again, but there's no specific time or.
We're down to number 18 in Spain.
In Spain?
I mean, my mate's in Spain. I should get him to just download the podcast while he's there. He was. Oh, they did him out of some internet. We've got up to 101 in Canada. We were high in Britain this week, but I can't get their website to work properly to tell me where we are in Turkey.
Turkey and Mexico.
Turkey and Mexico. That's the only ones we're bothered about.
Do they sell curly whirlies in Mexico?
We're below out of our league again this week, so we need to nobble Kyle Amor because he's on that now, isn't he? He can't escape from Kyle Amor. It's getting worse than Danica. Did you see her wearing a hat on the telly?
She got the bucket hat out.
Blue hat. Number 1 in Mexico. Number 2 in Turkey. Get back. Get back out of our league. Where are you? Nowhere. As if anyone actually cares. Ian can only play on the right-hand side at the moment. Well, that's right, you could play for Warrington. Sign you up. Elsewhere in the Men's Super League this week, We mentioned Huddersfield Hull. We're not going to mention that again. Hull KR, as you
It's
say,
a tough
beating-
watch, wasn't it?
It was.
I was really looking forward to that game as a complete neutral.
Yeah.
It's Thursday night. I've missed a couple of Thursday night games because of the
Everything
schedule.
else
We
on.
haven't had them. Great. I don't have a
Nothing else on.
a dog in the fight.
No.
Oh, I better go and get
Some
another
snooker on.
another curly whirly.
Snooker. Hull KR beating Castle mentioned. Another good win for Hull KR.
Disappointing for Cass, another second half fade out, which I think now it's becoming too frequent. But one thing I would say about Castleford's recruitment, and again, it's nothing to do with the people involved. You would not turn down the opportunity to come to play in Super League, but I think it's stretching a point, and they'll probably be brilliant next week, to get a player from Lebanon, a player from PNG, and a player from Greece who have not played much, if any, NRL, who are all mid to late 20s. And some of the Cass fans that were there at Hull KR may well say that Billy the Greek had an impact off the bench. I think it's putting a huge amount of pressure on those players to expect them to turn the fortunes of a team round in a competition that they have no experience of. And also in key pivotal positions, particularly Liam Horn, who's a hooker. I hope he goes really well, but I worry that if Castleford are now fishing in the Queensland Cup and the New South Wales Cup, and they're saying that's comparable to Super League, I don't think it is. I think you are cutting your cloth according to your means. That to me smacks of a bit of desperation.
Les is representing Netherlands. But there isn't a Netherlands chart on my list, so tell all your friends. Just download it.
Could he
and then
move to
delete
Turkey?
it. Yeah, download the podcast, delete it afterwards. Doesn't matter as long as you download it. We'll game the Apple charts. Amsterdam Cobras this year, today's champs, beating the Zwolle Wolves, as Badger mentions. The Wolves losing in a final, never. Continues. Kevin asks, I'll wait if we're going to catch Castleford, possibly.
I suspect they will.
We'll find out, won't we, in a couple of weeks' time. And the great thing for Wakefield is now, of course, they've overtaken London Scholars in terms of points scored. So well done, Wakefield. Finally.
I mean, it's an interesting week. They go to Hull, who weren't. And Tony Smith was acknowledged didn't play particularly well,
but can't win away, as you say. So.
But have beaten Hull in some games recently, mainly at Wakefield. Castleford have got Huddersfield again, who
Radio Leeds commentator is going to be on. Oh dear me, I don't know who's doing that one, but good luck to you. Good luck.
Castleford really have to win that game.
Yeah.
Because it is home form, I think, that's going to determine which of the two go down, and they cannot pass up the opportunity to beat the team that is just above them, albeit there's 8 points difference, which could be 10 if Huddersfield were to win their game in hand. But that you've got to put down as a winnable game at home.
Wigan beating Lee on the telly on Saturday. I know we haven't mentioned Saints, we'll come back to those in a moment. Well, we kind of mentioned this in passing, haven't we, with Lee going into the Challenge Cup. We mentioned this week, if they lost against Leeds, if you're a Lee fan, but they get no injuries, you're probably not bothered. I know you want to beat Wigan, but...
At the moment, Lee is 6 points clear of Salford in 7th, and they are not going to worry if they drop another 2 points this week. I suspect, again, that it was the 2 tries just before half-time that turned that game. Again, brilliant from Abbas Miski for the try that he scored in the corner that he should never have got
this
down.
Is every
and I
week,
still don't know.
No, every week
down.
we come into Rugby League, we watch these guys, no idea, not a clue. But an entertaining game for the cameras.
Yeah,
Tyler Dupree's going on debut.
Great that it was on Channel 4. Lots of storylines. Adrian Lamb extremely magnanimous, saying, obviously they lost to the better team, but there was always going to be a little bit of a hangover. I think Lee are in such a good place as a club at the moment that whether they win or lose last week or this week is nothing compared to the impact they could have at Wembley in a fortnight's time.
It's much we can say about Catalans and Salford other than that.
I listened to Bruno
was it
in
good?
French. I only knew what was happening because Catalan scored a lot of points.
Essay.
It sounded very comprehensive. I think, again, the issue for Salford, for me, more than the result, is Tyler Dupree leaving before the end of the season. What does that say about what is happening at Salford at the moment? And we spoke quite long and in detail about, asking fans to contribute, and you go, fine, but wasn't one of the ideas of that we could keep our best players? And yes, we've got £170,000, which is probably crucial in keeping the economic head above the water, but why did we invest in the club if we also have lost one of, if not one of the best young player that they've got? Now, whether he would have gone anyway, whether he would have gone to Hull KR was rumoured. I think what it says about Wigan is that their new owner clearly can't breach the salary cap. What he can do is pay some transfer fees, and that is another great signing. So they are going to lose one or two players, but you put a Dupree and a Sam Walters and an Adam Kieran, and you're saying again, we know what we want to be. We want a young British pack, and we're going to recruit in the image of what we're trying to build. And not going to say it again, but that's not what Warrington do. Oh, look, I did say it again.
What was Saints Leeds like? It seemed exciting enough on the telly. First game, 4 points between them.
Yeah, and there were some mistakes, and clearly, I think if you were a neutral, you would have relished that game. Leeds can't see out a game when they're getting a lead. It's been a failing of theirs all season. That having got it back to 18-16 and looking like, how do we then manage the game for the last 10 minutes to win it? The next set, they kick the ball out on the full and then concede a try on the back of it. There were some just great individual performances to really enjoy, not least Tommy Makinson. I thought, sorry, not Tommy Makinson, why did I say Tommy Makinson? Jack Wellesby, who I just thought, again, the one thing about Jack Wellesby that amazes me every time I see him play is he's not faultless. He again kicked out on the full, and Leeds scored on the back of that. But what he doesn't dwell on is any mistake. He just goes, right, okay, I will now rectify that by doing two things that are absolutely brilliant. I thought Wellesby was fantastic. Hopoate was really good. His late release of the ball, fantastic. But they didn't have forwards on the bench of note. So what they needed was their experienced guys to stand up and set a lead. And in Morgan Knowles and Matty Lees, they had two absolute Trojans out there who played long minutes, looked after the kids. Delaney looks a really good prospect, and they found a way to win. They're going to need to do more than that over the next 7 weeks if they're going to make it 5. But that was impressive. Leeds again, Nene MacDonald, didn't deserve to be on a losing side, but made far more meters than anybody else in the game on either side. But they just haven't got that ruthless instinct to kill a game, which they're going to need to find over the next 7 weeks, because most of the teams they play are around them in the league if they're going to make the 6.
Chris has asked a question about refereeing, which obviously when James is back we'll ask him about. We've got another former referee coming on soon.
Yeah.
About getting recently retired referees in to do the video refereeing when we've gotten them at all games.
If we get them all games. There is a major cost consideration for that, which we just do not have at the moment.
No, unless we get a bucket out to crowdfund video referees.
Well, again, we need to know what's happening. Well, we don't. The clubs need to know what's happening with the television deal. And again, it's being announced. There is no announcement.
What was the phrase Tony Sutton used on Radio Manchester to describe Channel 4 and Viaplay? Widening the broadcasting something.
I think you can forget Viaplay.
I thought that was fair enough on Channel 4's case.
The thing about Channel 4 is they are totally reliant on Sky releasing games. So it's that deal with Sky that you need to, or whoever, and I think it will be Sky. I genuinely don't think there's too many other players in the market. But you have to get that bottomed out to then know what you can have on Channel 4 and Our League and however else you're going to stream them.
The deal with Viaplay was never widening any kind of broadcast
not when it's a subscription.
Because it was completely going to be bought by people who watch the Championship.
The Channel 4
in the same way as it was before,
but not Viaplay, especially when we already know they're not renewing next year.
No. Before we get on to the rest of the stuff, when is the big game, say, Kevin? 18th of August. because
Moved to Friday, hasn't it?
exactly
For Sky.
because I had arranged to have the Sunday off to go to that game, but then they moved it, so I changed my dates to Friday. Then they put the Wheelchair Challenge Cup final on the Sunday where I'm not working. But I'll hopefully I'll be there. I think it's hopefully I'll be there. I just send an email. Say, can I come in? I say, yeah, possible. Would Dave Fafita be the best signing in Super League? Says Les. Off the back of James's question, if Wakefield do make the Great Escape, will it be considered the greatest Great Escape in Super League? Well, probably from where they started.
I don't
Losing 12
think
games in a
it's
row.
just for Fafita again. I think
No.
this is going to sound like the most broken of broken records. The great thing about re-signing David Fafita wasn't what he brings you on the field. It's the fact that he has the DNA of Wakefield in his heart, and by coming back. Now, I think Max Jowett coming back from injury is more important than David Fafita.
It takes the pressure off other players.
Yes, but it also, he walks in the dressing room and he goes, right lads, this is what Wakefield's all about. This is what we're doing. This is how we do it. These are the sacrifices we need to make. Could somebody go and get me a burger?
Because if you look at the work that like an Eddie Batty did yesterday, maybe that's the kind of player Warrington League. Just goes on the pitch, does his job. Looks like he could have been an extra in This Sporting Life, but gets the job done. Every team needs.
They
that
need
kind
a
of
Luke
players.
Yates type
What else have we got before we go on? Heart can win you games, says Ian. Have to make that a habit, though. No, there's no heart at White. It's a hard habit to break. In the Championship, Featherstone beat Batley 28-8 in front of a crowd of not applicable. York won at London 24-10. York are having a good run now.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously not going to Wembley, but
I think,
that's
again,
about the two teams
looking
not
at the
going.
table, I think, although Newcastle's result is amazing, has concertinaed it all at the bottom, I think York are out of it now. York are more likely to sneak into the playoffs than get dragged into a relegation
in the same way that Leeds might in the Super League. Newcastle beating Swinton 25-19. Was that 19-18 late on? Because that was the last score I saw, and then I saw the full
It
time.
was 10-0 to Newcastle at half time. You thought, oh, there's a surprise on here. Then Swinton, narrow lead, and you thought, oh, poor old Newcastle, it's going to be one of those days again. And no, they came back. And now they're potentially 2 wins off getting away, which will be be phenomenal.
Sounds like a cracking game at the Olympic Legacy Park on Friday. Sheffield coming from behind to edge out Halifax 32-30, because Sheffield had a bit of a wobble recently, haven't they? So big win for them. Toulouse, well, big win in terms of the score, 64-0 over Keighley.
Who again are slipping danger. With that Newcastle result, must make Keighley nervous.
And Widnes beating Whitehaven 36-28.
Which again, Whitehaven in it for a long time.
Gary the Viking earlier said Powell to Widnes. But I tell you what, I saw their advert for a media person this week, and they were offering far much more money than I thought a championship team would be. I can't work in Widnes. I don't know where it is.
I don't know. I think Daryl's aspirations may be slightly. I mean, he wouldn't have to move house because it's still Cheshire.
Hunslet with the big results
Massive.
in League One, beating Dewsbury. First defeat of the season for the Rams, 16-14.
And over 1,000 people there as well.
That's good. Rochdale beating Midlands 37-22.
7-6 at half time.
Yeah.
That's a proper rugby league score.
Workington and Doncaster. Yeah, Doncaster with a important win, 22-19, having
Needed
lost
to get back on the horse. And Workington had won, was it 6 in a row?
Yeah, and the ridiculous game, Cornwall,
Ridiculous.
3 in a row now.
I thought something was probably wrong on the social media feed when at half time it said Cornwall were winning 40 points to 4. That can't be right. And then you check the social media feed at the end of the game and it's 38-40. Was there a huge slope?
That's what I'm going to say. Anyone who was there, I don't know if this was the first game of Rugby League ever played in Rill. Where's Ian Golden when he did? Where is he?
The wind must have been blowing a howling gale that changed at half time. But that again is a great result for Cornwall, who've gone above Midlands with that result.
This week, there's no other news, is there? Other than we can all whinge about people being paid off by the RFL, but people get paid off, so that's what happened. There's no other news.
The only thing that was odd about that was not necessarily the amount of money or whether those people were doing a good job or not, is that we were told at the time that they'd resigned. But they clearly hadn't. They were moved on, and there is a payment to do that.
How do I get a job as a chief executive of a sports body? I've got the suit. In the Super League on Friday, it's Castleford, Huddersfield, Warrington, Catalans and Wigan Hull KR. Saturday in the Championship, Newcastle, Widnes, York, Toulouse and London Scholars Midlands Hurricanes in League One, as London look to close the gap in terms of points on Wakefield. On Sunday, the aforementioned Wakefield away at Hull, Leeds versus Lee, which is on the telly. Are they showing the women's game as well? Or just, that's okay then. And because I wouldn't want them to show that. No. And Salford versus St Helens, Championship, Barrow London, Batley Bradford. So again, Batley and Halifax have got the same questions, haven't they? Halifax at home to Fev. Well, they may as well just throw it in, haven't they? Because with the best away in the world, Halifax aren't going to beat Fev. Swinton, Keighley, massive game.
Which actually has been, the Halifax game has been moved from Monday night to Sunday night.
You're right, Badger. I thought it was going to turn into Tony Green then. Swinton, Keighley, massive game. Whitehaven, Sheffield, and in League One, Cornwall, Oldham, Dewsbury, Workington, North Wales, Doncaster, in Chester, and Rochdale versus Hunslet.
I have to say that the game of the weekend, I think, is probably going to be Swinton and Keighley in terms of what it actually means.
They should switch the cameras from the Halifax Fev game to that one instead.
One of those teams will be slightly scraping their nails away from the relegation zone. The other one is going to be right in the mix.
Can Barrow get something at home to London?
Well, Barrow have got to play tonight, though, haven't they?
Oh,
as we
that's
speak.
true, yeah.
Barrow are playing Bradford.
7:45 kick against Bradford, yeah. Tricky. Excitement, because we're coming towards the end of the season now. There's going to be some wheelchair internationals, aren't there, I read? Somewhere, I think.
Not announced yet.
No, but there are going to be some. So that's another thing to look forward to in the autumn.
That'll be in the same time frame as the running international,
which is end of October, start of November.
Yeah.
The IRL to consider future of World Cup. It's going to happen, just we don't know when.
Well, we might know by Wednesday.
Nothing else. That's it. We'll be back on Monday. Wembley week.
You were excited, weren't we?
More
We'll have
predictions.
our rattles.
Yeah, more predictions.
Rosettes. Community singing.
I think we've got a rosette somewhere. Yeah. Bring that back. We don't know who the entertainment is yet at Wembley, do we? On in the actual stadium.
The speaker is giving it the cup, isn't he?
Is he?
I think.
Oh, right. I should say congratulations to Trevor Hunt, because we like him.
Well, not until
not until the end of the
beginning of next year, and he's got to get voted in.
Oh, right. So he's not going to be able to say anything on Radio Manchester now, he might upset someone. Dear me.
Well, there's no point in criticising the RFL, because people say, get in there and do it.
It's one of us. It's one of ours. That's good. Did Carl Hall give the chains back, Rich?
Must have. Hope he polished them. I'll ask him.
So we'll be back next week with more excitement and drama as we build up for Wembley.
We will save Mr. Child his curly.
Yes.
I think I'm going to eat mine.
Not mine. Knocked it over. Well,